ding-dong going inside the papers. Let's first take a look at the front pages of the papers today.
Should we start with the Daily Mail? It's leading with that trailer. I mean, all the papers pretty much have this on their front page. The Sussexes, of course, with a Netflix documentary which drops on Thursday. The latest tease that we saw of it had Prince Harry claiming royal life is a dirty game.
So we're going to kick off. The Daily Telegraph is leading with Rishi Sunak's abandoning on key elements of his planning reforms in the face of rebellions by backbench Conservatives.
Here's The Guardian. It covers the house-building targets, reports on the rail unions announcing extra strike dates over the festive period as well. This is to include Christmas Eve.
And finally, a story we've been covering all morning. The Eye has a big splash detailing plans to give children antibiotics en masse for children in schools due to the Strep A outbreak. An 8th child has now died from the bacterial infection.
We've got a cup of tea on the go. Settle in and kick back. We'll go through the papers for you so you don't have to. We're joined this morning by the former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and environmental campaigner Amy Cameron. Glad you're sticking with us, Amy. At one point last hour I thought this is 3 against 1 here. We probably need to get a bit more balance in this. But listen, Claire, you want to start with the Mail. So Keir Starmer coming out talking about abolishing the Lords. Once again, Gordon Brown saying he wants to do that. Well, the second time I'm pretty sure that we've heard him say that. How has this gone down? Not just with Mail readers, but indeed in general.
I think in general, people are looking at it thinking we have bigger things in the country to think about. And obviously Keir Starmer is not Prime Minister, so any reforms may take a while for him to come through. I just think it's one of those issues that when you've run out of other things to say, you have a go at the House of Lords. Everybody, and as you quite rightly said, Gordon Brown has made efforts to look at House of Lords reform previously, and it's one of those things. Nick Clegg looked at it. It is so complicated. And I think your real problem is, by having an elected chamber, which is what Keir Starmer is suggesting that we move to, would just cause even more gridlock in our institution of Parliament as it is. But if you think it's slow now.
Why he's going after it? I mean, can you see that to a lot of people, the Lords looks like it's just packed full of cronies to keep the ruling classes in charge?
Absolutely, and I understand that. And when you look at it, you look at the recent appointees into the House of Lords, and they were friends of a former Prime Minister, and they are there to shore up the vote. The upper house is great as a scrutiny chamber. That's what it's there for, and that's what it needs to be used for. But over the years, it seems to be filled full of those who are going to do the Prime Minister's bidding at that end of the House. And when you have a majority in the House of Commons and you stuff the Lords with people that are going to agree with you, then that legislation isn't getting scrutinised properly. So there does need to be a conversation about reform of the House of Lords, but not abolishing it and not making it elected.
Do you think now's the time to be talking about this? And do you think it's failing in its role of scrutinising legislation? I mean, I just think of the online safety bill that's been knocking around. There's been some really high-level scrutiny from peers in there on that's really contributed to the debate.
Don't get me wrong, I think there are some peers who do a great job, and there is a vital role, I think, for that scrutiny, particularly in the recent past when there hasn't been much scrutiny with such an overwhelming government majority. I think the Lords have really come into their own. However, they, unfortunately, I don't think are necessarily representative of the 800 members of the Lords with an average age of 71. I think when you hear that, surely anyone in their right mind questions whether that is a system that is working. And I appreciate that to some it might at first glance feel kind of remote from their daily lives, but actually I think what we're talking about here are questions about standards in public life. Faith in politics in this country is going absolutely down the drain, right? People feel like politicians don't represent them. Shots of the Lords do absolutely nothing to help that. And I also think what Keir and Gordon are driving at here, first name terms there from me, I don't think they know who I am. I think what they're driving at here is also the need for greater representation from the regions. And you know, Martin, you as a Brexiteer will know that one of the big things that drove the Brexit vote was this sense that Westminster did not represent people. So I don't think this stuff is kind of technocratic. I actually think looking at who we have in Parliament and how those people are elected is vital to regaining trust in politics and also redistributing power away from Westminster.
But is that the priority now? Is it not a bit tone deaf when you're hearing about reports of people not being able to heat or eat their homes times right now, and we've got these huge crises and challenges, shortages of amoxicillin when there's, you know, strep A running rife around. Well, House of Lords report.
But this was a piece of work that's been commissioned by the Labour Party, right? So this is a piece of work that Gordon Brown has gone away and done. They are a party in opposition. And to Claire's point, this sort of legislative reform is complicated. And actually, I think having a lead up to these kind of changes is really important and an opportunity for us to debate.
I wonder how much the average voter cares. Well, actually, I know the answer to that question, because this was the Brexit policy. And we doorstepped this all across the West Midlands and East Midlands. No one really cared. I think the thing is, people are quite ambivalent. They don't really know what goes on in the House of Lords. I mean, your average working guy and girl, 56% of a YouGov poll don't even know what happens in the House of Lords. So I'm not sure that this is of interest to politicos. But do the voters really care?
But that's a part of the problem, right? Like, should we be paying the wages of 800 people when the vast majority of the population don't know what they do or who they are?
What do they get paid out of interest? Does anyone know?
It's they get an allowance of about 300 a day.
Do they get paid every time they tap in?
Right? Yes.
Some do take advantage of that. It's
I'm sure that reportedly some of them do.
Head to the bar,
sign in,
and obviously we've just
disappear.
had the Michelle Mone scandal. That's rumbling on in the papers. I think there is a real question about who is ending up in the House of Lords. And I think, to your point, Martin, if people don't know why they're there and don't see a value in them, I think that feeds into this general disenfranchisement with politics, which I think is really unhealthy in a democracy.
And just quickly, by the way, I never once tapped in as an MEP in Brussels and went straight to the bar. Never happened. We always did a full shift, honest officer. Anyway, let's move quickly on.
Talking about you know, people and value for money and all the rest of it, Claire, you've chosen a story in the Times about diversity inspectors and what they're charging and costing the police force specifically.
£10 million a year. And I think when you see it as brutally put as that, you wonder what on earth people are thinking. What is the police force doing to spend its money on inclusion and diversity people when officers are needed out on the street, there are crimes that are needed to be solved, people want their burglaries to be looked at. In my village, there's a little crime spree at the moment with motor vehicles. And you think, why would you spend £210,000 on somebody's annual salary for something that A, is mostly common sense, and B, doesn't need a dedicated person to sit there and tell you?
Haven't there been huge problems exposed, not least in the Met Police, in terms of racism, misogyny and the like, and this is trying to address that, Amy?
Absolutely. I think the stories we've seen coming out of the Met Police are fairly terrifying, whether you're a woman, whether you're a member of a community of colour. I think there's two things at play here, which makes me think actually this is good value for money if it's being administered effectively. Clearly the problems in the Met Police suggest that it's not. But one, we have to think about staff retention. We have huge problems retaining members of our public services, and I think if you are a woman or a minority ethnic member of community of colour and you're experiencing the kind of really toxic sexism and racism that we know is present in the police, in the fire service, etc., you're going to leave. And the cost of retaining staff is huge for a sector like the police. So I think, one, there's a staff retention thing about internal culture. Two, in this country we police by consent. So I think it's absolutely vital that our police forces invest in building stronger connections with the communities that they look to serve.
When you look into the figures, only 6% of burglaries get solved, and 24,100 staff days are lost every year on equality and training programs. People would like to say that this isn't a police force, this is a police farce. Come on.
You've been saving up that line. Credit where credit's due. But no, I do think that in reality, it's a small price to pay for a police force that is representative of the communities that they serve, and that's absolutely vital. I personally, as a young-ish woman living in London, have found some of the stuff about the Met Police truly terrifying, and it's made me question whether I would approach a police officer in the street. And that's me as a woman with a huge amount of privilege. I think demonstrating that the police understand the problems of racism and sexism in their ranks and are doing something to address it is vital if we want to continue policing.
But surely if that's just the training of the police officers, you don't need somebody who earns up to £82,000 for being an assistant director of diversity and inclusion. That isn't going to make the difference, is it really? It's not going to change the attitudes of those officers. That needs a huge shift in retention, in training, in recruitment. Those need to be better.
So arguably you're saying we're not spending enough, I think, in terms terms of the level of training that's required to root this out.
Would like to see the back of these sorts of roles.
I don't know what most people would think, but certainly there is divided opinion on this. Let us know your views at home, whether you are in favour of 10 million a year on this. Amy, I want to go to one of your stories. The issue of affordable childcare, well known to be a huge problem in this country compared to, well, most comparative developed nations, really. Labour have talked a lot about this in recent weeks. Is enough being done about this? What's being said about this in the Eye, page 10? Cheap childcare would provide £13 billion boost.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to cover this story because I think childcare in the UK is a real mess. You know, I'm at an age where lots of my friends are women attempting to get back into the workforce after taking time off from maternity and finding that effectively with the cost of childcare as it is, it doesn't make sense. Women are being shut out of the workforce and then de-skilled over periods of time because childcare in the UK, as you said, Isabel, is amongst the most expensive in the world. For me, this feels like really sensible policy making from Labour. They've played around in the margins of this. You might remember they spoke about breakfast clubs not that long ago. But I think providing universal access to childcare would, one, be a huge economic boost in terms of bringing more women back into the workplace and men, but two, we have to remember that these early years are absolutely vital for children's development. So levelling the playing field by providing the same quality of care for all of our young people is just I think that's just sensible investment.
One part of this debate, though, that I do feel always gets neglected, and I don't think that has to be mutually exclusive. You should have affordable childcare, absolutely, and women and men who want to go back into the workplace should do. But no one talks about the benefit to children, actually, of having access to their parents. It's really unfashionable to say. You know, I went straight back into the workplace. I had to, but you know, how lovely for my children if I could have been around in those early years. No one ever says that. But unfortunately, to be able to afford the same home that perhaps my parents would have had, instead of one income, you now have to have two. And it's the children ultimately who miss out on that time with their parents.
It is.
I'm not saying it doesn't mean you shouldn't get affordable childcare, but I think it is an issue that no one talks about.
And nobody does talk about it, and it is really, really tricky. I was a single parent for 9 years. I had no choice. I had to go back to work to keep a roof over my child's head. So therefore, he was in wraparound childcare, and he has become the most resilient character you would ever know. He can go and make friends very easily and has really blossomed into that kind of kid. Yes, it would have been fantastic if I could spend more time with him. Absolutely.
As a token bloke on today's panel,
nothing token about it.
Thank you very much. We need to do more to encourage fathers to get into childcare. I've written about this extensively over the years in places like Sweden, where fathers get the same as mums, up to 9 months for childcare. In Britain, we get 2 weeks. 2 weeks and you're straight back. So this idea that men sort of don't want to parent, often they just can't afford to.
No, 100%.
They get 2 weeks.
A lot of businesses do a lot better on this. I have to say there have been huge developments just since I've had my kids. I've seen younger friends and who've gone on to have kids, and dads in some businesses that I'm aware of have had 16 weeks off, which is absolutely incredible for those families. But you know, it is changing.
That's not the norm. Yeah, it should be more normal. It should get more dads involved.
Well, let's know your
hold on a minute. Am I agreeing with Martin?
Whoa! Whoa! We're not all about division. All sides of the coin heard here. All right, where should we go? We've done Amy. Let's go to Claire. Oh, can we talk about Matt Hancock? He's been in the headlines for at least half a day. He's hinted, hasn't he, about how much he's going to contribute of his I'm a Celeb fee to charity. What more do we know about this in the Telegraph today?
Is anybody surprised to learn that Matt Hancock may not be giving quite as much money to charity as we were led to believe? Out of his reported £400,000 fee, I think we're down to probably a donation, it looks like, from what people are saying, of about £4,000 to local charities, which is his monthly salary from being away from the House of Commons for a month to go and play in the jungle. I don't think anybody is going to be surprised. He did make a really big effort to say that he was going out there to talk about dyslexia and bring it to everybody's attention, and he mentioned it 3 times in the time he was out there.
Hancock got knocked off the front page by an even bigger, what do you call it, twonk. So in that sense, it's safe.
Yeah, right. Amy, Claire, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Enjoyed going through the papers with both of you this morning. More from you both soon, I'm sure.